So one of the interesting things about some of the first books people read in chess and some of the first instruction they ever get and the games that they review and study take on a whole new life. And I was unfortunately greatly affected by Emanuel Lasker's Common Sense in Chess, which was the book my father bestowed upon me as the book I should be learning from. A very bad book to begin with, in my opinion. However, it turned me into some sort of strange romantic player and a believer in B moves, which is kind of what Emanuel Lasker's all about if you study his games. And a lot of what I do today, you can find in that book. So one of the things he did was he did something called the fantasy variation, and as I recall, that was against the Carol Can, and no matter how many times I played it and experimented with it, it was just really hard to get any sort of advantage with it. It was kind of like just giving away a pawn for nothing. But this kind of variation is played against the Carol Can or against, in some cases, the French. And what I notice now is that engines name it the BlackmarDiemer Gambit, which to me the BlackmarDiemer Gambit is d4. And sometimes I open d4, and occasionally if I get d4, I play knight to c3, then e4, then f3, and gambit that pawn. And that's a very hard gambit to get any advantage out of as well. However, it has the merit of taking black out of his game. And in particular, as an e4 player, what I discover is players who play the Carol Can and the French in particular, and have an exchange in mind. In other words, if I move e4, you move c6, I move d4, they move d5, and then they play pawn takes pawn, or that in the French, like where they move e6 instead of c6, those are really dead games. Those are games where they're just going for equality and they just want to exchange everything down. They'd exchange their king if they could. So I hate that kind of chess, and I will avoid that like the plague. And one of the things I'll do is I'll just give them a pawn. Sure, I'm half a pawn down, but now we get to play chess against each other. It's now mano a mano, or against a girl, perhaps. So the computers now call all that sort of thing. It keeps popping out of my games, BlackmarDiemer. So even though I don't believe it's really the BlackmarDiemer, I believe it's more like Emanuel Lasker's fantasy variation of what he referred to as one of the things you could do against a Carol Can. I play it like he suggested it be played. And the principles are like this. You're moving f3 in order to sack a pawn. Now, there's a big problem when they decline that pawn, and we'll get to that in a future video, but the f-file opens for an attack. It's practically irresistible to these players. They don't want you playing f3 takes e4 because that gives this nice pawn center of d4, e4, and so they usually take it. And then that knight that you recapture with an f3 heads to e5. There's even a more daring variation that I play, but I play this against computers mostly, and that's where I take queen takes f3, giving them the d4 pawn. So the bishop on d3 or c4, depending on what white or black does with his white squared bishop. If his white squared bishop comes to g4, I sometimes play my bishop to c4, and there are lots of grandmasters who will lecture you that a white squared bishop, where possible, belongs in that diagonal, that c4 diagonal, headed toward f7. However, I like to develop it just as well on d3 in this particular formation, because black almost certainly is obligated to castle kingside because he's going to have to protect his f7 pawn at some point. So these players who play this sort of thing have studied the French, studied the Carol Can, and they've chosen these defenses for a reason. It's because they are positional closed type players who want to hop around with their knights and, exchange things off and wait for mistakes and have a sound pawn formation, and most of them dread playing against a gambit. So that's why I play the gambit. And we're going to proceed to one of these games right now. And this gentleman that I'm playing was rated 2167, and this was just played this last month. And I opened e4, and now we'll proceed with what the engine looks like. And there he's playing Carol Can. And there's another attack I play against the Carol Can we'll cover in a future video. Computer suggested e5 is one way, but that just gets into one of these locked up positional pawn chain struggles. Now knight takes e4, standard move, and look, we play f3. And the computer says that puts us down a quarter of a pawn. When we recapture, And now the computer suggests bishop to f5 is the number one move. That's interesting. You know, in all this time, I don't believe anybody's ever played bishop to f5 against me. So, knight to f6, now it suggests bishop to d3. There's a little bit of a problem here. Where do we put our bishop? Well, we put our bishop on d3 in this case, and that's what the computer liked. As a bishop to c4, he plays e6, and it just bites on granite there for no apparent reason. However, if he moved his white squared bishop out, it would have a little brighter prognosis. In many cases, what you want to do is you want to move knight to e5 and look at sacking on f7. So now it suggests bishop to d4, or g4 is the play. And this person comes with some sort of predisposed idea. I'll bet you anything that if we just played a standard Caro-Kann, he would have done this anyway. He would have fianchettoed, and you know there are variations of things that look kind of modern defensive in nature, and where you black fianchetto. So now we're kind of evenly divided between castles and bishop to f4. And one of the things that's true is in this formation, white is very flexible. As long as you can get away with it, and you're not walking headlong into queen to b6, attacking all kinds of things, you can probably castle queenside in this kind of formation. I would prefer to castle kingside where possible, because your rook on f1 is semi-developed as soon as you castle, which kind of feeds into the whole idea of the gambit. So he protects his knight, prevents doubles. Now it wants me to play h3 because it's in fear of the bishop pin because it attacks the d-pawn, and I ignore it. So we're basically playing all-out attack-style chess here. Wants me to play h3 again, and yet it says my move's just as good. Castles queenside has the same result numerically. So castles queenside is a very aggressive move, and my idea is to start pushing pawns here. Now, one of the things that black has to be aware of is that he's already past the point where he can play h6, chasing my bishop away and fortify by moving king up to h7, but he's a strong player, and he recognizes the bishop on d3 would just be aiming at his king anyway, so he's going to try to weather the storm, but he doesn't do a good job. So the fact is that bishop to g4 here could be played, and it could be a semi-defensive move, because it occupies a square and blocks, it actually protects the h5 square. So we're going to move there. The computer, as I recall, didn't really even consider this, didn't like it, just wanted me to move my king to b1, which is a good move and it's standard. But once again, this is a very even evaluation. Knight to b6, I'm not wild about that move. I don't like the knight on b6. I don't think it has a future. I mean, it can go to d5, but ultimately I'm not going to let him exchange because he's the one with no space. So now h3, let's look, the computer really hates that because bishop to g4 is now in the queue. Now I've gone down a whole half a pawn at least, because he can stop my push with bishop to g4, and guess what? I probably would have pushed it anyway. So he's going to move knight to d5, and now it's suggesting that I play bishop takes. And as you will see, I'm not a great player. I'm a good player, and I don't know as much as the computer knows, because to me, the computer's going to take back. I push. These are all number one moves. Now it says black should just take with the pawn. That's because it's an amazing machine, and it's going to allow checks, and it can defend that position. It's going to take with the pawn, probably move the bishop to g4, and have a lot of strong protection for it. So it says it's going to even be up almost a whole pawn after that. This is not something that occurs to normal human beings. So now we have knight takes, and I'll tell you right now, I did not play pawn takes pawn. I did not play h takes g, which the computer says puts me up almost 2. And the reason why is because I'm not that good. And, obviously there are threats and things, and I couldn't find my way all the way to the end of a mate. Here's what I saw. I saw one of these lines that say, knight takes a2 check. So in the middle of this, I play pawn takes pawn, he plays knight takes a2 check, I move my king to b1, and it seems to me that he can just recapture and be okay. recapture maybe with the f pawn, um, and then he would run into some sort of check on h6 and be able to protect his h7 pawn, or he could just actually try to save his knight, hop his knight out to b4, which would kind of throw my queen out of the attack, because then if my queen went and had to take his knight, it would take the wind out of my sails attack-wise. So those probably, none of that probably matters. The fact is that after he checks and moves to b4, I probably just move queen to f4, something like that, and completely foil whatever his plan is after he moves knight to g4. So that would be in response to that. So I hope that was clear. At any rate, I took with the queen, and now as you see, black has an advantage. So people would say, well, you blundered, and then the computer says I blundered, and yes, I do blunder, and that should be considered a blunder, but then again, I'm not that good. So so he moves his queen to d5, and of course the idea is to take my a2 pawn, and I can live with that. Now at least I get it right, and I take the pawn. So the interesting thing here is that I have the ability to move bishop to c4 in this particular situation if he takes with the f pawn, and that's going to end up putting his king in the corner, and it's going to protect my a2 pawn also. So the f pawn is the recommended recapture. The h pawn is semi-suicidal, but he did it anyway. So at this rate, I simply move back. Now it's going to be very difficult to defend the h6 square, because if he moves the rook over there, it gets exchanged, followed by the other rook going in the corner to h1 check, and then we get h6 anyway, and there's a mating net. So knight to g4 is the only move, as you can see. And in this just little brief encounter where I blundered by missing 1.7 plus move, and I've done this in other games I've showed, it doesn't really matter because he blundered back. And the fact is, this is very precise, and everybody blunders in the eyes of these engines. So now what do? Now we're going to see another blunder by me. Okay, this one's not as severe. Knight to e5 is a crushing move. Okay, well, why is that? Well, it turns out that knight to e5, you can't take it because of the checks and the horrible things that happened to him. But I wasn't ready to play that yet. I say, why calculate all that very difficult, grief-filled stuff to try to capture his knight if it's actually a distraction move, trying to distract his knight, if I can just move c4. So I saw c4 right away, and if I move c4, to me it has the added benefit of chasing his queen out of there and then moving knight to e5. So I move c4. Now it says he can move queen to d6, and look, lo and behold, the computer has me almost at the same evaluation after the strongest move, queen to d6. So you can't always believe computers. The question is, was it a blunder by me? Well, maybe, maybe not. Now I'm up 3. So where is he going to go with the queen? Queen to d6. That's the strongest move according to the machine. That's the move he made. Now we move knight to e5. So to me, moving d4 made more, or c4 made more sense to chase his queen away first. And now what we've got is a situation where there's some teeth involved. And it says he has got to move bishop to e6, but that's not what happens. He took the queen, the pawn, and the game's going to be over here, is because it says he can't touch that knight. He has to move rook to h8 to stave off mate, but he takes it. So now he gets checked, and now you're going to see more imprecise play by me. Rook on h to f1 check. That's the computer's #1 move. And it said he needed to move bishop to f5, but he did not. I moved bishop takes, or bishop to f5, discovering on his queen. So at that point, he thinks that there's some hope here, and there might be some hope in another life, but he's taken back, and now if you count it up, he's a piece up. So I take his queen. Now is he going to get some compensation in any way? He gets checked. If he can just survive, he's got a lot of pawns, and now after g4, the game's over and he resigns. So this was a BlackmarDiemer type formation, and a powerful attack came out of it that I initially misplayed, but the rest of it was pretty sound.